The winter of 2015 arrived in Anchorage with its characteristic brutality. On the morning of January 14th, the thermometer struggled to reach 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and a dense blanket of snow covered the residential streets of the Eagle River neighborhood, located on the northern edge of the city. The sky was an oppressive gray, heavy with clouds that promised more snow before noon. In that landscape of frozen silence, broken only by the distant sound of snowplows working on the main roads, the Andrews family began what seemed like just another ordinary Wednesday. Sarah Andrews woke up at 6:30 in the morning as she did every day. At 34 years old, she worked as a nurse at Providence, Alaska Medical Center and had learned to function with military precision during the dark Alaskan mornings. Her husband, Michael, a petroleum engineer at one of the refineries in the port of Anchorage, had already left for work an hour earlier. The house felt empty and cold, despite the heating system working at full capacity. Sarah went downstairs, started the coffee maker, and began preparing breakfast while mentally reviewing the day's tasks. "Lily, time to wake up, honey," she called from the bottom of the stairs, her voice echoing through the two-story wooden house. A muffled sound came from the second floor, followed by slow footsteps. Lily Andrews appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes with the backs of her hands. At 10 years old, she was a slender girl with light brown hair that fell to her shoulders and green eyes that seemed too large for her small face. She wore pink pajamas with unicorn prints, a Christmas gift she had received just 3 weeks earlier. "Do I have to go to school today?" Lily asked with a yawn, descending the stairs one step at a time, dragging her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear named Mr. Buttons. "Of course you do," Sarah replied with a soft smile, pouring orange juice into a glass. "It's Wednesday. You have that math test, remember?" Lily made a face but said nothing more. She sat at the kitchen table and began eating her cereal slowly, staring out the window at the snow continuing to fall. The neighborhood looked like a Christmas postcard. Houses with smoking chimneys, snow-covered fir trees, cars buried under white mounds. Everything seemed peaceful, almost idyllic. Sarah watched her daughter while sipping her coffee. Lily had always been a quiet, introspective child, preferring books and drawing to the noisy games other children her age enjoyed. She had few close friends at Birchwood Elementary School, but her teachers described her as intelligent and creative. Sarah sometimes worried that Lily was too solitary, too trapped in her own inner world. But Michael always reassured her that it was just a phase. "Did you finish your homework?" Sarah asked, sitting down across from her daughter. "Yes, last night," Lily replied without taking her eyes off the window. "Mom, do you think it will snow all day?" "Probably. That's why you need to dress warmly. I want you to wear your red coat and the boots with fur lining." Lily nodded absently. Outside, a black pickup truck drove slowly down the street, its tires crunching in the fresh snow. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was Richard Coleman's truck, their neighbor who lived 3 houses down, right at the corner of Northwood Drive and Silverbrook Lane. Richard was a 58-year-old man, a Vietnam veteran who had lived in the neighborhood for more than 15 years. He was a solitary figure but friendly enough, always willing to help shovel snow or fix a broken fence. Sarah had spoken with him on several occasions at community meetings, and he had always seemed courteous, though somewhat reserved. The truck stopped in front of Richard's house, and the man got out slowly, carrying grocery bags. He was tall and robust, with gray hair cut short in military style, and a thick beard that covered much of his weathered face. He wore a dark green jacket and work boots. As he walked toward his door, he looked up and seemed to notice Sarah through the kitchen window. He raised his hand in a brief greeting, and Sarah returned the gesture with a polite smile before turning her attention back to Lily. "Come on, honey, finish your breakfast. We need to leave in 20 minutes. Lily ate the rest of her cereal in silence while Sarah went upstairs to finish getting ready. When she came back down, Lily was already dressed in jeans, a thick sweater, and her red coat. Her backpack, covered in pins of animated characters, was on her back, and her boots were firmly laced. "Perfect," Sarah said, checking the time on her phone. "Ready to go?" "Can I walk alone today?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah stopped, surprised by the request. Birchwood Elementary was only 4 blocks from home, and the route was relatively safe, crossing residential streets with little traffic. Many children in the neighborhood walked to school alone or in groups, especially the older ones. But Lily was only 10, and something in Sarah made her hesitate. "I don't know, honey. It's very cold today and the snow." "Mom, please. Emma and Josh always walk alone and they're my age," Lily interrupted, mentioning 2 classmates who lived on the next street. "I know the way. I'll go straight to school, I promise." Sarah bit her lower lip, considering. It was true that the neighborhood was safe. There had never been serious incidents, and most neighbors knew each other. Moreover, Lily needed to start gaining independence. She couldn't protect her forever. "Okay," Sarah finally said, crouching down to Lily's height. "But you go straight to school, understood? No detours, no stops. And if anyone tries to talk to you or seems strange, you run to the nearest house and ask for help. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mom. I promise." Lily smiled, a genuine smile that illuminated her small face. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, inhaling the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I love you, little one. Have a good day at school." "I love you too, Mom." Sarah opened the front door, and an icy gust of wind entered the house. Lily pulled up the hood of her coat and stepped out onto the porch. The snow was falling more heavily now, large flakes dancing in the air before settling on the ground. Sarah watched as her daughter descended the steps and began walking down the sidewalk, her small figure contrasting against the white landscape. "Lily!" Sarah called, and the girl turned around. "Text me when you get to school, okay?" Lily nodded and waved before continuing on her way. Sarah stood in the doorway for a few more seconds, watching her daughter walk away. Something inside her, a maternal instinct she couldn't quite identify, made her uncomfortable, but she shook her head, dismissing the feeling as irrational worry. Lily was growing up. She had to learn to let go. Sarah closed the door and returned to the kitchen to finish her coffee. Through the window, she could still see Lily walking down the street, her red coat a small splash of color against the monochromatic winter landscape. Then, as Lily turned the corner of Silverbrook Lane, she disappeared from view. That was the last time Sarah Andrews saw her daughter for 8 years. At 7:45 in the morning, Sarah's phone rang. It was the school secretary, Mrs. Patterson, informing her that Lily had not arrived for first period. Sarah felt her heart stop. She immediately called Michael, who left work and returned home. Together, they drove the route to the school, searching for any sign of their daughter. They found nothing. By 9 in the morning, they had filed a missing person report with the Anchorage Police Department. By 10, search teams were already being organized. By noon, the news had spread throughout the neighborhood and volunteers began arriving to help. But Lily Andrews had vanished, as if the snow had swallowed her completely. And in a house less than 200 meters away, behind a locked basement door, a nightmare was just beginning. The first 48 hours after Lily Andrews disappeared were a chaos of organized desperation. The Anchorage Police Department mobilized every available resource, treating the case with the urgency that missing child cases demand. Detective Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran of the force with a specialty in crimes against minors, took charge of the investigation within hours of the initial report. Webb was a methodical man in his late 40s, with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much human cruelty. He arrived at the Andrews home at 2 in the afternoon on January 14th, accompanied by his partner, Detective Rachel Torres, a sharp woman in her mid-30s known for her ability to extract information from reluctant witnesses. The house was already filled with neighbors, family members, and uniformed officers coordinating search efforts. Sarah Andrews sat on the living room couch, her face pale and drawn, her hands trembling as she clutched a photograph of Lily. Michael stood by the window, staring out at the falling snow with an expression of complete helplessness. The house felt suffocating despite its size, the air thick with fear and disbelief. "Mr. and Mrs. Andrews," Webb began, his voice calm but firm as he sat across from them. "I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need you to walk me through everything that happened this morning. Every detail, no matter how small, could be important." Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. She recounted the morning routine, Lily's request to walk alone, her own hesitation and eventual agreement. Her voice broke several times as she spoke, guilt already settling into her bones like a disease. Did Lily seem upset about anything? Any problems at school, with friends, anything unusual in her behavior recently? Torres asked, taking notes in a small leather notebook. "No, nothing," Michael said, turning from the window. His voice was hoarse. She was a normal kid, quiet, maybe a little shy but happy. She loved school, loved reading. There was nothing wrong. Webb exchanged a glance with Torres. They had heard similar statements countless times before. Parents rarely saw the warning signs until it was too late, if there were any warning signs at all. "What about the route to school? Did she always take the same way?" Webb continued. "Yes," Sarah replied. "Down Northwood Drive, turn left on Silverbrook Lane. then straight on Mountain View Road until you reach the school. 4 blocks total. It's a safe route. Residential streets, low traffic. Other kids walk it every day. We'll need a list of all those children, their names and addresses, Torres said. We'll interview everyone who might have seen Lily this morning. Over the next 6 hours, Webb and Torres conducted preliminary interviews with neighbors and created a timeline. According to multiple witnesses, Lily had been seen walking down Northwood Drive at approximately 7:35 in the morning. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from the Andrews, had been looking out her window and saw Lily pass by, her red coat clearly visible against the snow. That was the last confirmed sighting. By evening, search teams consisting of police officers, volunteers, and members of Alaska Search and Rescue were combing through the neighborhood. Cadaver dogs were brought in, following Lily's scent from her house toward Silverbrook Lane, but the trail went cold near the intersection. The falling snow had covered any potential evidence, and the frigid temperatures made outdoor searching increasingly dangerous as night approached. Richard Coleman joined the search efforts shortly after 4 in the afternoon. He appeared at the command post that had been set up in the Birchwood Elementary School parking lot, offering his help. He was wearing the same dark green jacket from that morning, now covered in snow, and his face showed appropriate concern. "Terrible thing," he said to Officer Jennifer Hayes, who was coordinating volunteer assignments. "Sarah and Michael are good people. That little girl, I've seen her around the neighborhood, sweet kid. I want to help however I can." Hayes, grateful for any assistance, assigned Coleman to a search grid covering the wooded area behind Mountain View Road. He spent 3 hours trudging through knee-deep snow with a group of other volunteers, calling Lily's name into the darkness, his flashlight beam cutting through the falling snow. When the search was suspended at 9 o'clock due to dangerous conditions, Coleman returned to the command post, his face red from cold, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Nothing out there," he reported to Hayes, shaking his head sadly. "We'll try again tomorrow." Poor family. What no one knew, what no one could have possibly suspected, was that Coleman had driven home afterward, parked his truck in the garage, and descended into his basement where Lily Andrews lay unconscious on a thin mattress, her hands bound with zip ties, her mouth covered with duct tape. The sedative he had administered that morning was beginning to wear off, and soon she would wake up to a nightmare from which there would be no escape for 8 long years. The investigation expanded rapidly over the following days. Detective Webb established a tip line that received hundreds of calls, most leading nowhere. The FBI was brought in on day 3, their child abduction rapid deployment team setting up operations alongside local law enforcement. Agent Kimberly Russell, a specialist in child predator psychology, joined the investigation and immediately began building a profile of the potential abductor. Based on the circumstances, we're likely looking at someone local, Russell explained during a briefing on day 5. The abduction was opportunistic but planned. The perpetrator knew the neighborhood, knew the routine, knew exactly when and where to strike. This wasn't random. The statement sent chills through the community. The idea that someone they knew, someone they saw regularly, could be responsible for Lily's disappearance was almost too horrific to contemplate. Webb's team conducted extensive background checks on everyone within a 2-mile radius of the Andrews home. They interviewed teachers, bus drivers, postal workers, delivery personnel, maintenance staff at the school. Sex offenders in the area were questioned and their alibis verified. Security camera footage from local businesses was reviewed frame by frame, but nothing emerged. Richard Coleman was interviewed on day 7. He sat in his living room offering coffee to Webb and Torres, answering questions with calm cooperation. His military service record was exemplary. 2 tours in Vietnam, honorable discharge, multiple commendations. He had worked as a mechanic at Elmendorf Air Force Base for 25 years before retiring. He lived alone, had never been married, had no criminal record whatsoever. "I barely knew the family," Coleman told the detectives. "We'd wave hello, maybe chat about the weather occasionally. I helped Michael fix his snowblower last winter. That's about it. I can't imagine what they're going through." Torres asked if they could look around the house, a routine request during such investigations. Coleman agreed immediately, even seemed eager to cooperate. "Of course, anything to help. Look wherever you need to." The detectives conducted a walkthrough of the main floor and the second story. The house was neat, almost Spartan in its organization. Military precision was evident everywhere, books arranged by height, canned goods in the pantry labeled and aligned perfectly, tools in the garage hanging in precise order on pegboards. The basement was cluttered with storage boxes, old furniture, and mechanical equipment. Torres briefly opened a few boxes, finding Christmas decorations and old military memorabilia, but nothing suspicious. They never noticed the small door hidden behind a tall metal shelving unit in the far corner, concealed so expertly that it looked like part of the wall. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Coleman," Webb said as they prepared to leave. "If you think of anything, see anything unusual, please call us immediately." "Absolutely, Detective. I hope you find her soon. This whole thing is it's awful." After the detectives left, Coleman stood at his front window watching their unmarked sedan drive away through the falling snow. His expression remained calm, almost pleasant. Then he descended into his basement, moved the shelving unit aside with practiced ease, unlocked the hidden door, and entered the small room where Lily sat huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with terror. "The police were just here," he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "They didn't find you. No one will find you, so you might as well stop hoping." Lily said nothing. She had learned in the past week that silence was safer than words. Coleman stood there for another moment, then closed and locked the door, returning the room to darkness. Weeks turned into months. The massive search efforts gradually diminished as resources were redirected to other cases. The media coverage, initially intense, began to fade. By summer, Lily Andrews had become another name on a list of missing children, her smiling school photograph appearing periodically on news programs during slow news cycles, always accompanied by the same question: what happened to Lily Andrews? Sarah Andrews quit her nursing job, unable to function in the world while her daughter remained missing. Michael threw himself into his work, the only thing that kept him from drowning in grief and guilt. Their marriage, strained beyond endurance, eventually collapsed. They divorced quietly in 2017, both too broken to fight about anything anymore. Detective Webb never closed the case file. Even as years passed and he handled dozens of other investigations, he kept Lily's photograph on his desk, a reminder of his failure. He reviewed the case periodically, looking for anything he might have missed, any lead left unexplored, but there was nothing. Lily Andrews had simply vanished. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though the shadow of that January morning never truly lifted. Parents held their children a little closer, watched them a little more carefully. Security systems were installed. Neighborhood watch programs formed. And Richard Coleman continued to live his quiet, unremarkable life, maintaining his lawn, helping neighbors with odd jobs, always friendly, always appropriate. No one suspected, no one knew. And in the hidden room beneath his house, Lily Andrews grew from a child into a teenager, her world reduced to darkness and fear, her voice forgotten, her hope slowly dying, until 8 years later, an anonymous phone call would finally bring the truth into the light. March 15th, 2023. Detective Marcus Webb sat at his desk in the Anchorage Police Department's Major Crimes Unit, reviewing case files in the gray afternoon light filtering through the office windows. At 56 years old, he was approaching retirement, his body carrying the weight of 3 decades in law enforcement. His hair had gone completely white, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent grooves. But his mind remained sharp, and his dedication to unsolved cases had never wavered. Lily Andrews' file lay open before him, as it had countless times over the past 8 years. The photograph of the 10-year-old girl with green eyes and light brown hair stared up at him, frozen in time. Webb had reviewed this case so many times he could recite every detail from memory, every interview transcript, every dead-end lead. Yet something always drew him back, an instinct that refused to let him classify it as a cold case and file it away forever. His phone rang at 3:47 in the afternoon. The caller ID showed unknown number. "Detective Webb," he answered, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had answered thousands of similar calls. There was silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of breathing. Webb waited, experienced enough to know that sometimes people needed a moment to find their courage. "Detective Webb?" The voice was male, muffled, as if the speaker was covering the phone or using some kind of cloth over the receiver. "I have information about Lily Andrews." Webb's entire body went rigid. He immediately activated the call recording system on his desk phone, a standard procedure for any call related to an open investigation. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up a pen. "I'm listening," Webb said calmly, though his heart was racing. Over the years, he had received dozens of calls about Lily Andrews, psychics claiming visions, Attention seekers offering false information, well-meaning but mistaken citizens reporting sightings that led nowhere. He had learned to temper his expectations, but something about this caller's tone felt different. "She's alive," the voice said. "Lily Andrews is alive. She's been alive this whole time." Webb's breath caught in his throat. "Where is she? Who is this?" "I can't tell you who I am, but I can tell you where she is." There was a pause, the sound of movement, as if the caller was looking around nervously. "She's in the basement of Richard Coleman's house, the neighbor. He's kept her there since the day she disappeared." The name hit Webb like a physical blow. Richard Coleman. He remembered the man clearly, the cooperative neighbor who had joined the search efforts, who had allowed them to search his house without hesitation. Webb's mind raced through the memories of that initial investigation, the walkthrough of Coleman's home, the basement cluttered with boxes and equipment. They had found nothing. How could they have missed this? "How do you know this?" Webb demanded, his voice sharp now. "What's your connection to Coleman?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that girl has been suffering for 8 years and no one knew. No one looked hard enough." The caller's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through the attempted disguise. "Check the basement. There's a hidden room behind a shelving unit in the far corner. That's where he keeps her. That's where he's always kept her." "Wait," Webb started, but the line went dead. He immediately tried calling back, but the number was blocked. Webb sat frozen for a moment, his mind processing the information. Every instinct he had developed over 30 years screamed that this was credible. The specific details, the emotion in the caller's voice, the precise location description. This wasn't a prank or a false lead. Webb stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "Torres!" he called across the office to his partner, who was reviewing paperwork at her own desk. "We need to move. Now." Detective Rachel Torres looked up, immediately reading the urgency in Webb's expression. She had worked with him long enough to trust his instincts without question. "What's happening?" "Potential lead on Lily Andrews. We need a warrant and a tactical team. I'll explain on the way." Within 40 minutes, Webb had briefed Captain David Morrison on the anonymous tip. Morrison, a cautious administrator who had to balance investigative hunches with legal procedures and department resources, listened with growing concern. "An anonymous tip about a case that's 8 years old?" Morrison said, leaning back in his chair. "Webb, you know how this looks. We can't just raid a citizen's home based on an unverified phone call." "Captain, with all due respect, we're talking about a missing child," Webb replied, his voice tight with barely controlled urgency. "If there's even a chance she's alive and we don't act immediately, we're responsible for every additional hour she suffers." Richard Coleman was cleared in the initial investigation, but we never had cause to conduct a thorough search. This caller knew specific details about a hidden room. "That's not information a random person would have," Torres added. "We can get a warrant based on credible information from a confidential informant." The caller provided specific location details that can be verified. "If we're wrong, we apologize and move on. If we're right." She let the sentence hang. Morrison was silent for a long moment, weighing the potential outcomes. Finally, he nodded. "Get your warrant, but I want this done by the book. Full tactical support, documentation of everything. If this goes sideways, I don't want any legal issues that could compromise a potential prosecution." By 6:30 that evening, Webb had obtained an emergency search warrant from Judge Patricia Hendricks, who had read the affidavit with increasing alarm before signing it immediately. The Anchorage Police Department's SWAT team was mobilized, briefed on the situation, and prepared for entry. The operation was planned with military precision: simultaneous entry through front and rear doors, immediate securing of all rooms, priority search of the basement. At 7:15, as darkness settled over Anchorage and light snow began to fall, a convoy of unmarked vehicles and one armored SWAT van rolled quietly down Northwood Drive. The neighborhood was quiet, lights glowing in windows, families settling in for the evening. Richard Coleman's house sat at the corner of Northwood and Silverbrook, a modest 2-story structure that looked identical to dozens of others in the area. His black pickup truck was parked in the driveway, indicating he was home. Webb felt a surreal sense of déjà vu as he approached the house where he had stood 8 years earlier, conducting what he thought was a routine interview. If the caller was right, Lily Andrews had been mere feet away during that conversation, locked in a hidden room while he and Torres walked through the house above her. The thought made him physically ill. "All teams in position," came the voice through his radio earpiece. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, commanding the SWAT team, was coordinating from the armored van parked one house down. Execute, Morrison's voice responded, having insisted on being present for the operation. The front door of Richard Coleman's house exploded inward as the battering ram struck it. Simultaneously, the back door was breached. Officers in tactical gear flooded into the house, their voices sharp and commanding. "Police! Search warrant! Show your hands!" Richard Coleman was in his living room, sitting in a recliner watching the evening news, a cup of tea on the side table next to him. He looked up in genuine shock as armed officers surrounded him, their weapons trained on his chest. For a moment, his face showed complete bewilderment, the reaction of an innocent man whose home was being invaded. Then for just a fraction of a second, something else flickered in his eyes. Recognition, calculation, and resignation. "What the hell is this?" Coleman demanded, raising his hand slowly. "What's going on?" "Richard Coleman, remain where you are," one of the officers commanded. "You're being detained while we execute a search warrant for these premises." Webb entered the house behind the tactical team, his heart pounding. Torres was beside him, her weapon drawn, her face set in grim determination. They made their way directly to the basement stairs while other officers secured Coleman and began searching the main floor. The basement looked exactly as Webb remembered it, cluttered, filled with storage boxes, old furniture, tools, and equipment organized with military precision. The air was cold and smelled of concrete and motor oil. Webb's eyes scanned the space, looking for the shelving unit the caller had mentioned. There, in the far corner, partially obscured by shadows, stood a tall metal shelving unit against the wall. It looked permanent, heavy, filled with paint cans and cardboard boxes. But as Webb approached, he noticed something that had escaped his attention 8 years ago. Faint scratch marks on the concrete floor, as if the unit had been moved repeatedly. "Help me with this," Webb said to 2 officers, and together they gripped the shelving unit. It was heavy but mobile, mounted on hidden casters. As they pulled it away from the wall, Webb's flashlight beam revealed what had been concealed behind it. A small door, barely 4 feet tall, painted the same gray as the concrete wall, fitted so precisely into the foundation that it was nearly invisible. A heavy padlock secured it. Webb's hands shook as he pulled out his bolt cutters. "Lily?" he called out, his voice breaking. "Lily Andrews? This is the police. If you can hear me, we're here to help you." Silence. Then, from behind the door, a sound so faint, Webb thought he might have imagined it. A whisper, a movement, the suggestion of life in that terrible darkness. He cut through the padlock with one powerful squeeze, the metal giving way with a sharp crack. The door swung inward, and the smell that emerged made several officers step back. Human waste, unwashed body, the stench of long-term confinement. Webb shone his flashlight into the space beyond. The room was approximately 8 feet by 6 feet, with a low ceiling barely 5.5 feet high. There was no window, no ventilation beyond a small air duct. A thin, stained mattress lay on the concrete floor. A bucket in one corner served as a toilet. The walls were bare concrete, marked with scratches and what looked like attempts at keeping a calendar. And there, pressed against the far wall, blinking in the sudden light, was a young woman who looked much older than her 18 years. She was emaciated, her hair long and matted, wearing clothes that were little more than rags. Her skin was pale from years without sunlight, her arms wrapped defensively around her knees. But her eyes, those green eyes from the photograph that had haunted Webb for 8 years, those eyes were unmistakable. "Lily?" Webb whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Lily Andrews?" The young woman stared at him, her expression a mixture of terror and disbelief, as if she couldn't quite process what was happening. Her lips moved, forming words she seemed to have forgotten how to speak aloud. "It's okay," Webb said gently, holstering his weapon and slowly entering the cramped space, making himself as non-threatening as possible. "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here. You're safe." Behind him, Torres was on her radio. "We found her. We found Lily Andrews. Get medical up here immediately. And someone get Sarah Andrews on the phone. Her daughter is alive." The Providence, Alaska Medical Center emergency room erupted into controlled chaos when the ambulance carrying Lily Andrews arrived at 8:43 that evening. Dr. Jennifer Moss, the attending physician on duty, had been briefed during the transport and had assembled a specialized team. Trauma nurses, a psychologist, a social worker, and specialists in malnutrition and long-term captivity cases. They had treated victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and various forms of abuse, but nothing quite prepared them for what they were about to encounter. Lily was brought in on a gurney, wrapped in thermal blankets, an IV already attached to her arm by the paramedics. Her eyes darted around the brightly lit emergency room, overwhelmed by the sudden exposure to fluorescent lights, voices, movement, stimuli she hadn't experienced in 8 years. She was visibly trembling, her breathing rapid and shallow, showing signs of severe panic. "Everyone step back," Dr. Moss commanded, recognizing the signs of sensory overload. "Too many people, too much stimulus. Give her space." The medical team reduced their numbers, dimmed the lights in the examination room, and worked with deliberate slowness to avoid frightening Lily further. Dr. Moss approached carefully, her voice soft and non-threatening. "Lily, my name is Dr. Moss. You're in a hospital. You're safe here. No one is going to hurt you. We need to examine you to make sure you're okay. Is that all right?" Lily's eyes locked onto Dr. Moss's face, searching for something. Trustworthiness, perhaps, or simply trying to determine if this was real or another cruel trick. After a long moment, she gave an almost imperceptible nod. The physical examination revealed the horrifying extent of Lily's ordeal. She weighed only 93 pounds, severely underweight for someone her age and height. Her muscles had atrophied from years of confinement in a small space with minimal movement. She had multiple healed fractures in her ribs and left arm that had never been properly treated, causing them to heal incorrectly. Her teeth showed signs of decay and neglect. There were scars on her wrists and ankles from restraints, some old and faded, others more recent. But perhaps most concerning were the psychological indicators. Lily barely spoke, her responses limited to whispers or single-word answers. She flinched at sudden movements, cowered when anyone raised their voice nearby, and showed signs of severe dissociation, periods where she seemed to mentally remove herself from her surroundings entirely. Dr. Patricia Kellerman, the trauma psychologist called in for the case, recognized these as classic symptoms of long-term captivity and abuse. She's exhibiting signs consistent with complex PTSD, severe anxiety, and what we call learned helplessness. Dr. Kellerman explained to Detective Webb, who had accompanied Lily to the hospital and refused to leave until he knew she was stable. 8 years of imprisonment during crucial developmental years, from age 10 to 18. That's going to have profound psychological impacts. She missed her entire adolescence, had no social interaction beyond her captor, no education, no normal human development. The road to recovery is going to be long and difficult. Webb stood outside Lily's room, watching through the window as nurses worked carefully around her. His emotions were a complex mixture of relief, rage, and overwhelming sadness. They had found her alive, which was more than he had dared hope for after 8 years. But alive didn't mean whole. The girl in that hospital bed had been robbed of her childhood, her innocence, 8 years of her life, and he kept thinking about his own role. How he had walked through Richard Coleman's house, had been feet away from where Lily was imprisoned, and had seen nothing. "Detective Webb?" A nurse approached him. "Lily's mother is here." Sarah Andrews appeared at the end of the hospital corridor, escorted by Officer Jennifer Hayes. Sarah was 42 now, but looked much older, her face marked by years of grief and anguish. When she had received the call that Lily had been found alive, she had collapsed in her apartment, overcome with emotions she couldn't even name. Now approaching her daughter's room, she moved as if in a dream, unable to fully process the reality of the situation. "Mrs. Andrews," Dr. Moss intercepted her gently before she could enter the room. "Before you see Lily, I need to prepare you. She's been through severe trauma. She's not the same little girl you remember. She's going to need time, space, and professional help. This reunion needs to be handled very carefully." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I need to see her. I need to know she's really alive." Dr. Kellerman accompanied Sarah into the room. Lily was lying in the hospital bed, her eyes closed, though she wasn't sleeping. The psychologist could tell from her breathing pattern and the tension in her body that she was aware of everything around her. "Lily," Dr. Kellerman said softly, "there's someone here who wants to see you. Your mother is here." Lily's eyes opened slowly. For a moment there was no recognition, just wariness. Then Sarah stepped into her line of sight and something shifted in Lily's expression. Confusion, disbelief, and then something that might have been hope. "Lily? Baby?" Sarah's voice broke. "It's Mom. It's me." The reunion was not like the dramatic scenes depicted in movies. There was no running into each other's arms, no immediate emotional release. Instead, Lily stared at her mother as if trying to place a face from a distant dream, her expression uncertain. Sarah, for her part, stood frozen. shocked by how much her daughter had changed. This wasn't her 10-year-old little girl. This was a traumatized young woman who looked like a stranger. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered finally, the first words she had spoken clearly since being found. "I'm sorry I couldn't come home." Sarah broke down completely, sinking into a chair beside the bed. "Oh, baby, no. You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. This wasn't your fault. None of this was your fault." Dr. Kellerman intervened gently. "Mrs. Andrews, I think that's enough for tonight. Lily needs rest, and this is overwhelming for both of you. You can come back tomorrow and we'll work on rebuilding your relationship slowly." Sarah reluctantly agreed, leaving the room but refusing to go far. She spent the night in the hospital waiting room, unable to leave while her daughter was so close after being lost for so long. Meanwhile, at the Anchorage Police Department, Richard Coleman sat in an interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table, his expression calm and composed. He had said nothing since his arrest except to request an attorney, but Webb and Torres were waiting, preparing for the interview that would come once his lawyer arrived. Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen had been called in, recognizing immediately that this would be one of the highest profile cases Alaska had seen in decades. The charges were extensive: kidnapping, false imprisonment, child endangerment, and depending on what Lily revealed, potentially sexual assault, and numerous other felonies. Coleman was looking at life in prison without possibility of parole. Coleman's attorney, Harold Becker, a seasoned criminal defense lawyer, arrived at 10:30 that evening. He spent an hour with his client before emerging with a stone-faced expression. "My client is willing to make a statement," Becker announced, surprising everyone. "But he has conditions." Webb and Torres exchanged glances. "What conditions?" Chen asked. "He wants immunity from the death penalty. He wants to be housed in protective custody. And he wants his statement to be recorded and sealed until trial." "Absolutely not," Chen said immediately. "He's not in a position to negotiate anything." "Then you'll get nothing from him," Becker replied calmly. "And without his statement, you'll never know the full truth of what happened. That girl in the hospital, she can barely speak. She's traumatized beyond measure. My client is the only one who can provide a complete account of the past 8 years. I think the family deserves to know the truth, don't you?" It was manipulative, and everyone in the room knew it. But it was also effective. After 2 hours of negotiation, a deal was reached. Coleman would provide a full statement in exchange for removal of potential death penalty consideration and protective custody placement. Alaska hadn't executed anyone since 1957, so the death penalty clause was largely symbolic, but Coleman wanted it formalized. At 1:15 in the morning on March 16, 2023, Richard Coleman sat across from Webb and Torres in the interrogation room, the camera recording, and began to speak. "I never meant for it to go on so long," he started, his voice steady, almost conversational, as if discussing a minor mistake rather than 8 years of imprisonment. "When I saw her that morning walking alone in the snow, something just clicked. I'd been watching her for months, watching the family. I knew their routines, knew when the girl would be alone. That morning when she turned onto Silverbrook Lane, I was waiting in my truck." Webb felt his stomach turn, but he kept his expression neutral, letting Coleman talk. "I offered her a ride. Told her I'd seen her mother ask me to pick her up because of the snow. She hesitated. She was a smart kid, cautious. But I was the neighbor. She knew me. She trusted me. She got in the truck." Coleman paused, showing no emotion. "I drove her to my house, parked in the garage, and brought her down to the room I'd prepared. I told her it would just be for a little while, until things calmed down. I told her if she stayed quiet, she could go home soon. But you never let her go," Torres said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "No, because after a few days I realized I couldn't. The search was too intense. There were police everywhere. If I let her go, she'd tell what I'd done. So I kept her. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. After the first year, I think we both understood she was never leaving." "Why?" Webb asked, the only question that mattered. "Why did you do this?" Coleman was silent for a long moment. "Because I could. Because I wanted something that was mine. Because I was tired of being alone. Does it matter? I know what I am. I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of victim or that I had noble intentions. I took that girl, and I kept her, and I would probably still have her if someone hadn't called you." "Who called us?" Torres demanded. "Who knew she was there?" Coleman smiled slightly, a chilling expression. "I don't know, but I can guess. I have a brother in Seattle, Eric. We haven't spoken in 20 years, but he came to visit last month. Showed up unannounced. I think he heard something, saw something. He was always the moral one in the family. The statement continued for 3 more hours. Coleman described in clinical detail how he had maintained control over Lily through a combination of physical restraints, isolation, psychological manipulation, and threats. He had told her that her family had stopped looking for her, that no one cared if she was alive or dead. He had created a world where he was her only human contact, making her dependent on him for food, water, even conversation. It was a masterclass in how to break another human being. When the interview finally ended, Webb stepped outside the interrogation room and vomited in the bathroom, unable to contain his revulsion any longer. In all his years on the force, he had never encountered evil quite so banal, so matter-of-fact. Coleman spoke about imprisoning a child the way someone might discuss maintaining a car. Practical, routine, unremarkable. The news broke the next morning, and within hours, it was international. The story of Lily Andrews, the girl who had vanished in 2015 and was found alive 8 years later, imprisoned in her neighbor's basement, dominated every news cycle. The media descended on Anchorage like a swarm, camping outside the hospital, the police station, the Andrews home, Coleman's house. It became a spectacle, a feeding frenzy of reporters seeking any detail, any angle, any interview. But inside the hospital, Lily Andrews remained largely unaware of the chaos her discovery had created. She was focused on more immediate challenges, learning to trust again, learning to speak, learning to exist in a world that had moved on without her while she remained frozen in darkness. The weeks following Lily Andrews' rescue were a blur of medical treatments, psychological evaluations, and legal proceedings that moved with unprecedented speed. The Anchorage Police Department had assigned a protective detail to the hospital, keeping the relentless media at bay, while Lily received the care she desperately needed. But beyond the physical healing, the emotional and psychological recovery would prove to be the far greater challenge. Dr. Patricia Kellerman visited Lily every day, establishing what she hoped would become a foundation of trust. The sessions were brief initially, 10 to 15 minutes, because Lily's capacity for engagement was severely limited. She would often dissociate mid-conversation, her eyes going distant, her mind retreating to some internal safe space she had created during her years of captivity. Trauma of this magnitude fundamentally rewires the brain, Dr. Kellerman explained to Sarah Andrews during one of their many consultations. Lily spent her entire adolescence in survival mode. Her development was arrested. In many ways, emotionally and socially, she's still that 10-year-old girl who disappeared, but she's also an 18-year-old who has experienced things no one should ever experience. Integrating those two realities is going to take years, possibly a lifetime. Sarah listened, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what her daughter faced. She had spent 8 years imagining the worst, but the reality was somehow even more devastating than her darkest fears. The daughter she had lost was gone in a very real sense, and the young woman who had returned was someone Sarah didn't know, someone she would have to learn to know from the beginning. Michael Andrews arrived at the hospital on the 3rd day after Lily's rescue. His relationship with Sarah had been civil but distant since their divorce, the shared grief of losing Lily having destroyed rather than united them. But now, standing together outside their daughter's room, they found themselves tentatively reconnecting through their mutual concern. "I don't know how to be her father anymore," Michael admitted quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know who she is. I don't know what she needs. I don't even know if she remembers me." "She remembers," Sarah said softly. "Dr. Kellerman says she has clear memories of her life before. That's actually part of the trauma. She knew exactly what she lost, what was being taken from her every day." When Michael finally entered Lily's room, accompanied by Dr. Kellerman, Lily's reaction was immediate and visceral. She pressed herself against the headboard of the bed, her breathing becoming rapid, her eyes wide with fear. It took several minutes of gentle reassurance before she calmed enough for the psychologist to understand what was happening. "Men," Dr. Kellerman explained to Michael outside the room afterward. "For 8 years, the only man she had contact with was Richard Coleman. She's developed a conditioned fear response to male presence. It's going to take time and careful exposure therapy before she can interact comfortably with men again, even her own father." Michael stood in the hallway, tears streaming down his face, the weight of helplessness crushing him. His little girl was afraid of him, not because of anything he had done, but because of what had been done to her. By the end of the first week, Lily had gained 3 pounds and was showing slight improvement in her physical condition. She could walk short distances, though her muscles remained weak. She was eating small amounts of solid food, though her digestive system struggled with anything too rich after years of minimal nutrition. The physical therapists were cautiously optimistic about her recovery on that front. The psychological recovery was far more complicated. During one session with Dr. Kellerman, Lily finally began to speak more substantively about her experience, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to count the days," she said, staring at her hands. "I scratched marks on the wall trying to keep track of time, but after a while I lost count. The days just blended together. Dark, always dark. The only light was when he came down, and I never knew if he was bringing food or something worse." "Did he hurt you, Lily?" Dr. Kellerman asked gently. "I need to know so we can help you properly." Lily was silent for a long time. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Not in the way you might think. He didn't do that. But he would withhold food if I cried too much. He would leave me in complete darkness for days if I tried to scream. Once, when I tried to fight back, he broke my arm. He called it discipline. He said he was teaching me how to behave. The revelations were documented carefully, adding to the mountain of evidence against Richard Coleman. But for the medical team, they provided crucial information about the specific traumas that needed to be addressed in treatment. Detective Webb visited Lily on her 10th day in the hospital. He had been hesitant, worried that his presence might trigger negative associations, but Dr. Kellerman felt it might be therapeutic for Lily to see the man who had rescued her, to connect a positive association with authority figures. Lily was sitting up in bed when Webb entered, looking slightly better than she had that first night. Her hair had been washed and trimmed, and she was wearing clean hospital clothes, but her eyes still held that haunted quality, the shadow of years spent in darkness. "Hi, Lily," Webb said softly, sitting in a chair several feet from the bed, maintaining distance to avoid overwhelming her. "I'm Detective Marcus Webb. I'm the one who found you. I wanted to see how you're doing." Lily studied him carefully as if trying to assess whether he was safe. Finally, she spoke. "You really are a detective?" "Yes. I've been a detective for a very long time. I worked on your case from the very first day you disappeared. You looked for me?" Her voice was small, uncertain, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Every day," Webb said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every single day for 8 years. I never stopped looking. I'm so sorry it took so long to find you." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "He told me no one was looking. He said my parents didn't want me anymore. He said the police had closed the case and forgotten about me. He lied," Webb said firmly. "Your mother never gave up hope. Your father never stopped searching. And I kept your picture on my desk every day as a reminder that I had failed you. But we found you. You're safe now. And Richard Coleman is never going to hurt anyone ever again." For the first time since her rescue, something like relief crossed Lily's face. She had lived for so long in Coleman's reality, where his word was absolute truth, that hearing it contradicted by an authority figure seemed to lift some invisible weight from her shoulders. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, with Webb carefully answering Lily's questions about the investigation, the search efforts, and what had happened to her family during her absence. When he left, Dr. Kellerman reported that it was the most engaged and present Lily had been since her rescue. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Richard Coleman were moving forward with remarkable speed. District Attorney Michael Chen had assembled a prosecution team and was building what he called the most airtight case I've ever seen. Coleman's confession, recorded and documented, combined with the physical evidence from his home and Lily's medical records, created an overwhelming body of evidence. Coleman's attorney, Harold Becker, was already floating the possibility of a guilty plea in exchange for life imprisonment instead of multiple consecutive sentences. "My client understands the gravity of what he's done," Becker told the press during a carefully staged interview. "He's willing to accept full responsibility and spare the victim the trauma of a trial." But Chen was having none of it. "This man stole 8 years from that girl. He robbed her of her childhood, her adolescence, her innocence. The people of Alaska deserve to see justice served in a court of law, and Lily Andrews deserves to see her captor held accountable publicly. There will be no plea deal that lets him avoid trial." The community response was overwhelming. Vigils were held outside the hospital, with hundreds of Anchorage residents leaving flowers, cards, and stuffed animals. A fund was established to help cover Lily's medical expenses and future care, and within a week it had raised over $200,000. The outpouring of support was genuine and heartfelt, though the media attention that accompanied it was often intrusive and unhelpful. Sarah Andrews found herself thrust into an unwanted spotlight. Reporters camped outside her apartment, shouting questions whenever she came or went. She had to hire a lawyer just to handle media requests and protect her family's privacy. Michael, who had relocated to Anchorage from Fairbanks where he had moved after the divorce, faced similar harassment. The story was simply too sensational, too compelling. It had everything the media loved: an innocent child, years of suffering, a shocking revelation, and a villain who had hidden in plain sight. On Lily's 14th day in the hospital, she asked to see her old house. Dr. Kellerman was hesitant, concerned that returning to the place where her normal life had ended might be traumatic. But Lily was insistent, and the psychologist eventually agreed, believing that confronting her past might be a necessary step in her recovery. The visit was arranged carefully. Police secured the area, keeping media and curious onlookers at a distance. Sarah and Michael accompanied Lily, along with Dr. Kellerman and 2 nurses. It was late evening when they arrived, the spring sun setting over the mountains in the distance, casting long shadows across the snow-covered street. Lily stood on the sidewalk outside the house where she had lived for the first 10 years of her life, staring at it as if seeing it for the first time. The house looked the same, yet completely different. Sarah and Michael had sold it years ago, unable to bear living there after Lily disappeared. The new owners, a young couple with no knowledge of the home's history, had graciously agreed to allow the visit. "It's smaller than I remembered," Lily said softly. "In my head, it was huge, but it's just a regular house." They walked slowly to the front door, Sarah's arm around Lily's shoulders. Inside, the layout was the same, but the furnishings were different, the colors changed, the atmosphere transformed by new occupants. Lily moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching walls, looking out windows, trying to reconcile memory with reality. When they reached what had been her childhood bedroom, now converted to a home office, Lily stopped. She stood in the doorway for a long time, not entering, just staring at the space that had once been her sanctuary. "I used to dream about this room," she whispered. "When it was really bad, when I couldn't take it anymore, I would close my eyes and imagine I was here, safe, home. I would remember what my bed looked like, where my stuffed animals were, the way the light came through the window in the morning." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "But I couldn't remember perfectly. The details would fade, and I was so afraid that eventually I would forget everything about my real life, that his version of reality would become the only reality I knew." Sarah pulled her daughter close, both of them crying. "You never forgot. You held on. You survived." The visit lasted 30 minutes before Dr. Kellerman determined that Lily had reached her emotional capacity. On the drive back to the hospital, Lily was quiet, processing what she had experienced. But that night, for the first time since her rescue, she slept for more than 2 hours without waking in panic. The anonymous caller who had provided the tip about Lily's location was never identified. Detective Webb followed up on Coleman's suggestion that it might have been his brother Eric, and indeed, Eric Coleman had visited Anchorage in February 2023. But Eric denied making the call when contacted, and there was no evidence to prove otherwise. The phone used had been a burner, untraceable. Whoever had made that call had saved Lily's life and then disappeared back into anonymity. Webb had his theories. Eric Coleman's visit timing was too coincidental to ignore. Perhaps he had heard something, seen something, suspected something, and made the call out of conscience but couldn't face the implications of turning in his own brother. Or perhaps it was someone else entirely. A delivery person who heard crying, a utility worker who noticed something odd, a neighbor who had suspicions but no proof until something finally pushed them to act. The truth might never be known, and in some ways Webb thought that was appropriate. The anonymous caller had done what needed to be done without seeking credit or glory. As March turned into April, Lily's physical recovery continued steadily. She was walking normally now, gaining weight, her body slowly healing from years of neglect. But the psychological scars would take far longer to fade, if they ever fully did. Dr. Kellerman was frank with Sarah about the prognosis. "Lily will never be the same person she would have been if this hadn't happened. Those 8 years changed her fundamentally, but that doesn't mean she can't build a meaningful, fulfilling life. It just means the path forward will be different than anyone imagined. She'll need years of therapy, possibly medication for anxiety and depression, a carefully structured support system. And even then, there will be triggers, Flashbacks. Difficult days. This isn't something she'll get over. It's something she'll learn to live with. Sarah accepted this reality with quiet determination. She had been given a miracle. Her daughter returned from the dead. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The trial of Richard Coleman began on September 18, 2023, in the Nesbet Courthouse in downtown Anchorage. The case had been expedited through the legal system with unusual speed, reflecting both the overwhelming evidence and the public's demand for swift justice. District Attorney Michael Chen led the prosecution personally, assembling a team of specialists in child trauma cases, forensic psychology, and criminal law. The defense, despite Harold Becker's considerable experience, faced an almost impossible task. The courtroom was packed every single day of the 3-week trial. Media credentials were so sought after that the court had to establish a lottery system. Outside, protesters held signs demanding maximum sentencing, while victim advocacy groups used the trial as a platform to discuss child safety and the failures of initial investigations. The case had transcended its individual facts to become a symbol of larger societal concerns about predators hiding in plain sight. Lily did not attend the trial. Dr. Kellerman and the prosecution team agreed that forcing her to face Coleman in a courtroom would be unnecessarily traumatic and potentially derail months of therapeutic progress. Instead, her testimony was provided through a carefully conducted video deposition, recorded in a private room with only essential personnel present. Even watching the playback of that testimony in court was difficult for everyone present. On the screen, Lily sat in a comfortable chair, wearing simple clothes, her hair pulled back, looking simultaneously like a young woman and a frightened child. Her voice was steady but quiet as she recounted in clinical detail what the past 8 years had been like. She described the morning she was taken, the initial days of captivity when she still believed she might be released, the gradual crushing of hope as weeks became months and months became years. He would come down every day, Lily testified, her eyes focused somewhere beyond the camera, usually twice, morning and evening. He would bring food, never enough to be full, but enough to survive. He would talk to me sometimes, telling me about his day, about things happening in the world outside. He acted like we were friends, like this was normal. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Jennifer Hawkins, asked gently, "Did you ever try to escape?" In the beginning, yes. I screamed until my voice gave out. I tried to break down the door, but it was too strong. After he broke my arm for fighting, I stopped trying physical resistance. I tried other things, begging, bargaining, promising I wouldn't tell anyone if he let me go, but nothing worked. Eventually, I realized there was no escape. The room became my entire world. "How did you survive mentally?" Hawkins asked. "How did you maintain your sense of self through 8 years of isolation?" Lily was quiet for a long moment. "I almost didn't. There were times when I thought about just giving up, stopping eating, stopping trying. But I would think about my mom, my dad. I would remember their faces, their voices. I would tell myself stories about what I would do when I got out. I held on to the idea that someday, somehow, someone would find me. Even when he told me no one was looking, even when years passed and no help came, I held on to that hope. It was the only thing I had." The courtroom was silent as the video continued. Jurors openly wept. Even the judge, Superior Court Judge Thomas Reynolds, a veteran of 30 years on the bench known for his stoic demeanor, was visibly affected. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. Forensic experts testified about the physical evidence found in Coleman's basement, DNA evidence, fingerprints, the scratches on the walls that matched Lily's testimony about her attempts to mark time. Medical experts detailed Lily's injuries and malnutrition. Psychologists explained the long-term effects of captivity and isolation on developing minds. Detective Webb testified about the original investigation and the anonymous tip that led to Lily's rescue. His testimony was particularly powerful when he described walking through Coleman's house 8 years earlier, completely unaware that Lily was imprisoned just feet away. "I've replayed that day in my mind thousands of times," Webb said from the witness stand, his voice heavy with emotion, "wondering what I missed, what signs I should have seen." Richard Coleman was calm, cooperative, seemingly concerned about Lily's disappearance. He even joined the search efforts. He looked me in the eye and lied, and I believed him. That failure will haunt me for the rest of my life. The defense's strategy was limited given Coleman's recorded confession and the overwhelming physical evidence. Becker focused on arguing against premeditation, suggesting the initial abduction was impulsive rather than planned, hoping to avoid the most severe sentencing enhancements. He brought in psychologists who testified about Coleman's childhood trauma and military service, attempting to provide context for his actions without excusing them. But Coleman himself undermined his own defense. Against his attorney's advice, he insisted on testifying. On the stand, he showed no remorse, no emotion, no recognition of the magnitude of his crimes. He spoke about Lily as if she were a possession he had acquired, describing his actions with the same detachment he had shown in his police confession. "I knew what I was doing was wrong according to society's rules," Coleman said calmly when asked if he understood the nature of his actions. "But in my mind, I had created something that was mine. A world where I had complete control, where someone depended entirely on me. It satisfied something I can't fully explain." The testimony was devastating for the defense. Even jurors who might have been inclined towards some degree of sympathy found themselves repulsed by Coleman's coldness. When the prosecution cross-examined him, forcing him to confront specific details of Lily's suffering, her broken arm, her malnutrition, her psychological deterioration, he remained emotionally flat, as if discussing weather patterns rather than the torture of a child. Sarah Andrews attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row of the gallery, often accompanied by Michael. They listened to every horrific detail, forcing themselves to understand fully what their daughter had endured. It was excruciating, but they felt they owed it to Lily to bear witness, to ensure that her suffering was acknowledged and validated. During breaks, reporters would swarm them, shouting questions, seeking reactions. Sarah learned to keep her head down, to say nothing, to simply endure the gauntlet between the courtroom and the street. But on the final day of testimony, before closing arguments, she agreed to make a brief statement outside the courthouse. Standing before a forest of cameras and microphones, flanked by Michael and their attorney, Sarah read from a prepared statement, her voice shaking but determined. "For 8 years I lived in a hell of not knowing if my daughter was alive or dead, suffering or at peace. When we found out she was alive, it was the greatest relief and the greatest horror combined. Relief that she was breathing, horror at what she had endured. No parent should have to hear what we've heard in this courtroom. No child should have to experience what Lily experienced. Richard Coleman didn't just steal my daughter. He stole 8 years of her life, 8 years of our family's life, 8 years that can never be recovered or replaced. Whatever sentence he receives will never be enough, will never balance the scales of what he took from us. But we hope that justice will provide some measure of closure and allow us to focus on Lily's healing and recovery." The closing arguments took place on October 6, 2023. Jennifer Hawkins delivered a passionate, comprehensive summary of the evidence, walking the jury through every element of every charge. She concluded with words that resonated throughout the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not complicated. Richard Coleman kidnapped a 10-year-old child, imprisoned her for 8 years in conditions that can only be described as torture, and robbed her of her childhood, her adolescence, and nearly her life. He has shown no remorse, no recognition of the pain he caused, no acknowledgement of Lily Andrews' humanity. He treated her as an object, a possession, something that existed solely for his benefit. Your verdict must reflect the magnitude of these crimes and send a clear message that society will not tolerate the abuse and exploitation of children, no matter who the perpetrator is or how well they hide their crimes." Harold Becker's closing argument was brief and professional, but even he seemed to acknowledge the hopelessness of his position. He asked the jury to consider Coleman's age, his military service, and the possibility of mental illness, suggesting that life imprisonment without parole was sufficient punishment without adding additional consecutive sentences for each count. But his heart clearly wasn't in it. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all 23 counts: kidnapping, false imprisonment, child endangerment, assault, and numerous other charges, guilty on every single count. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. Judge Reynolds, known for his measured approach to sentencing, showed no mercy in this case. He imposed the maximum sentence on every count, to be served consecutively rather than concurrently, a total of 275 years in prison, without possibility of parole. "Mr. Coleman," Judge Reynolds said, looking directly at the defendant, "you committed one of the most heinous crimes this court has ever encountered. You stole a child, imprisoned her during the most crucial years of her development, and subjected her to years of physical and psychological torture. You showed no remorse, no empathy, no recognition of the humanity of your victim. You are a danger to society and to every child who might cross your path. This court sentences you to spend the remainder of your natural life in prison, where you will never again have the opportunity to harm another human being. Coleman showed no reaction, as he was led from the courtroom in shackles. Sarah and Michael held each other, crying tears of relief and grief. Justice had been served, but it didn't undo the damage. It didn't give Lily back her childhood. It was simply the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. In the months following the trial, Lily slowly began the process of rebuilding her life. She was living with Sarah in a new apartment in a different part of Anchorage, far from the neighborhood where she had been taken. The media attention had finally begun to die down, allowing them some measure of privacy. Dr. Kellerman continued working with Lily 3 times a week, using specialized trauma therapy techniques designed for long-term captivity survivors. Progress was slow and non-linear. Lily had good days and bad days. She still struggled with nightmares, anxiety, and periods of dissociation. Loud noises could trigger panic attacks. Darkness still terrified her. She slept with multiple lights on. Crowds were overwhelming, but there were also moments of hope. Lily had begun reading again, rediscovering her childhood love of books. She had started taking online courses, working toward her high school equivalency diploma with the help of specialized tutors who understood her unique situation. She had even begun tentatively reconnecting with a few childhood friends, though the relationships were complicated by the vast gulf of experience between them. Michael had moved back to Anchorage permanently, determined to be present in Lily's life. The relationship was still difficult. Lily's fear of men extended even to her father, but they were working on it with professional guidance. Short visits, always in safe spaces, slowly building trust. In December 2023, nearly a year after her rescue, Lily agreed to her first and only media interview. It was conducted by a respected journalist known for sensitive handling of trauma survivors, and Lily had complete control over the questions and the ability to stop at any time. The interview would help fund her continued treatment and education. Sitting in a comfortable room, looking more like herself than she had in months, Lily spoke about her experience with remarkable clarity and strength. When asked what she wanted people to understand about her ordeal, she thought carefully before responding. "I want people to know that monsters don't always look like monsters." Richard Coleman was a regular person, someone people trusted, someone who seemed normal. That's what made it possible for him to hide what he was doing for so long. "I also want people to know that survival doesn't mean you're not damaged. I'm alive, and I'm grateful for that, but I'm not the same person I would have been. That person died in that basement. I'm someone new now, someone who has to figure out how to live in a world that moved on without me. It's hard. It's going to be hard for a long time, but I'm trying." When asked what gave her hope for the future, Lily smiled slightly, a rare and precious sight. The fact that people never stopped looking. The fact that someone made that call to save me. The fact that my mom never gave up hope. The fact that there are people like Dr. Kellerman who dedicate their lives to helping people like me heal. I lost 8 years, but I have the rest of my life ahead of me. I'm going to make it count. The interview ended with Lily looking directly into the camera, her green eyes clear and determined. No longer the terrified girl found in a basement, but a young woman who had survived the unimaginable and was fighting to reclaim her life. In the spring of 2024, the Alaska State Legislature passed Lily's Law, requiring law enforcement to conduct more thorough searches during missing child investigations, including the use of thermal imaging and specialized detection equipment that might have found Lily years earlier. It was a small victory, a way of ensuring that her suffering might prevent similar cases in the future. Lily's case became a permanent part of criminal justice curriculum, studied by law enforcement agencies across the country, as an example of both investigative failures and ultimate success. Detective Webb retired in 2024, but not before receiving commendations for his persistent dedication to Lily's case. He visited her occasionally, a grandfather figure who represented the persistence of hope. The house where Lily had been imprisoned was eventually torn down, the lot remaining empty. The neighborhood had requested its removal, unable to bear the constant reminder of what had happened there. A small memorial garden was planted on the site, with a plaque that simply read, "For Lily, and for all those still searching." As for Lily herself, she continued the slow, painful work of healing. She enrolled in community college in 2025, studying psychology with the goal of eventually helping other trauma survivors. Her story would never have a simple, happy ending. The damage was too profound, the scars too deep. But she was alive, she was free, and she was determined to build a life that honored the strength it took to survive. On January 14, 2025, the 10-year anniversary of her abduction, Lily stood with her mother on a beach outside Anchorage, watching the winter sun set over the mountains. The date could have been a day of mourning, but Lily had decided to reclaim it as something else, a celebration of survival, of resilience, of the fact that darkness does not last forever. "I'm here," she said quietly, as much to herself as to Sarah. "I'm still here." And in that simple statement was everything. All the pain, all the struggle, all the hard-won triumph of a young woman who had been stolen, hidden, and finally found, who had been broken but refused to stay broken, who had survived when survival seemed impossible. Lily Andrews' story would be remembered as one of the most shocking cases in Alaska's history, but more than that, it would be remembered as a testament to human resilience, to the power of hope, and to the fact that even in the darkest places, even after years of suffering, the human spirit can find a way to endure.